Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? Good? All right, I'm glad to see you all here today. Thank you for coming to our event. This is our final speaker for our AI Speaker Series this semester, so it's been a great semester. I've seen many of you come to each of our events, and I'm glad that you're here today with us. We have an excellent guest, Dr. Annette Vee, who I'll introduce in a moment. Before I jump into my welcome, I also want to thank a few people. Of course, I always need to thank my team, Jeffrey, Grace, and Chi Yu, who are here helping today. And I also want to thank the grants office, because the reason why we're here is they helped me get a Perkins grant that made it possible for us to bring in these excellent speakers. So I really appreciate their work in making this possible. And I also want to thank Caitlin Prager, who helped me sort of identify our speaker for today. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to her. She was actually a speaker at the SUNY Council on Writing conference last fall, and so that's how we got clued into her work. And Dr. Annette Vee is the Director of Composition at University of Pittsburgh. I have a couple notes about her. Her research is at the intersection of computation and writing and speaks to fields as disparate as literary studies, digital humanities, computer science, education, and law. She is the author of Coding Literacy: How Computer Programming is Changing Writing, and is published on computer programming, blockchain technologies, intellectual property, and AI-based text generators in Interfaces, Literacy and Composition Studies, the WAC Clearinghouse, Enculturation, and Computational Culture. And one other thing I would want to say is that we share a professional background. Annette is a writing teacher by trade. And one thing I know about people who are in writing studies is they care deeply about teaching and learning. So I know that we're in for a great talk today to give us some wonderful ideas about how to engage students in the classroom and to think seriously about AI. Annette, welcome to FIT.
All right. I'm going to check my sound here. Am I good? Okay. Excellent. I always have to stand to the side of podiums, so if you can't see me, please feel free to move. Thank you so much for being here, especially on a Friday, a beautiful Friday. I got here Wednesday, and it's been, I think, 10 years since I've been in New York City. I remember the last time I was in New York City, I was pregnant with my first of 3 children, and I remember thinking, like, I'm not going to be here again for a while, and sure enough, now that my kids are a little bit older, I'm really happy to travel here and be here. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for identifying me in the SUNY conference. Brian and Jeffrey and Grace, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Susie, for filming. We are going to talk today about the promises and perils of AI in the college classroom. And I mean that really seriously. Like, I think there's a lot of positive things to think about with AI, and there's a lot of concerns and challenges we have with AI. So I'm not here to say, like, rah AI here, but I think we can, like, critically engage with this technology that is now the backdrop of where our students are writing. So here is a QR code if you want to follow along with the slides. There's also a link. They should be readily accessible for you. And in the workshop, here's what we're going to talk about. How students are using AI now. I have some data to share with you from Pitt students, and then a little bit from FIT students too. Some sample AI policies. And thinking about how we might emphasize process over product. This is a kind of response to AI being in the landscape of where our students are writing now. Strategies for talking to students about AI, and that means, like, if you find them using AI and that wasn't part of the design of your course, or also talking to them about AI literacy questions, things like that. How to recognize AI writing and respond to it. Thinking about aligning your assignments to course goals, and then finally integrating AI productively into your course. What are the ways that we can think about AI to enhance the kinds of teaching that we're already doing? So the main point here is that AI likely changes the role of writing and research in your course. This is where students are writing now. We are not going back, I don't think. So students are working in the landscape of AI. That means that They could be using it to shortcut learning goals that you have in the class. They could be using it productively to aid learning. And they are almost certainly going to need to use it professionally after graduation. That's where they are going to be heading. And so I do think that we have some kind of responsibility, first of all, to critically engage with AI, but second of all, to think about how we might be integrating it generatively into our classes in order to prepare them for what they do after graduation. So here's some data that I have from Pitt students about how students are using AI technology. And I started giving a survey to Pitt students in December of 2022 after ChatGPT. As Brian suggested in the introduction, I've been thinking about the intersection of computation and writing for a long time. I used to be thinking about it, about how people wrote for computers through computer programming, things like that. Now I'm really interested in how computers are writing for people. So I've been thinking about AI for a few years. And so when ChatGPT dropped, I thought, oh boy, we're going to need to contend with this. I also direct the composition program at Pitt. We have 7,000 students come through every year. We have about 150 faculty members teaching and graduate students, things like that. So this was a big job for me, both from a research angle and from an administrative angle, and then of course as a teaching angle too, since I also teach. So I gave this survey because what I really wanted to know is how students were thinking about this technology and how they were actually engaging with it. Because I kept seeing these articles, and you've seen probably some of these articles too, right? I'm a student, you have no idea how much we're using ChatGPT. A lot of these articles are kind of designed to make us wring our hands and like, oh no, education is over, like we have no relevance, there's no writing anymore, et cetera. I think that's all wrong, but I do think that there's some important things that they're bringing up here, is that we need to think about these things, right? And this particular article is from the Chronicle of Higher Ed from May of 2023. And in this, they kind of talked about that a lot of students are not just putting in your prompt and then getting out something from ChatGPT. They are doing something a little more sophisticated and breaking down the writing process. They're using it for brainstorming. They're using it for editing. They're using it for a lot of other contexts. So I first wanted to know which writing technologies Pitt students have heard of or used. And at least early on, some of the faculty at Pitt were like, I don't want to talk about ChatGPT because then I'm going to introduce that to them. And like, that horse is out of the barn. Students all know about ChatGPT. They may know less about other AIs. Most of them have not spent time thinking about other AIs besides Grammarly. They've been using Grammarly for a long time. Grammarly now has an AI that's built into it that's giving them a little bit more of a kind of, it had been giving them grammar help, but now it's like grammar help on turbo. But most of them are still using the free version of ChatGPT, but they all know about it. 100% of them know about it now. I also was really curious about their ethical orientation and how they think that students should be using AI. Now, I direct the composition program, so that's the area that I surveyed. Those are the students that I surveyed. And what I saw was actually a distribution that I was pretty happy to see, that students were, they thought that AI could be used ethically for checking, correcting spelling. I mean, we've been using spell check for, since we've been using word processing, right? Since it was like really integrated into Microsoft Word. Okay, that's fine. Like now I expect a student to turn in a paper that's been spell checked. But if you see all the way at the bottom, they are less invested, and they think that it's less ethical for AI to write full essays, write full paragraphs, things like that. I'm happy to see that, because I think actually that's kind of the orientation that I feel for their use of AI too. So I had some open-ended questions too, and I was really curious about why they used AI text generators, and this includes ChatGPT, but Claude and lots of other ones. And then my next slide is why they're not using them. So these are some of the reasons why they say they're using them. They're using them to make sure their writing is all the same verb tense. They're thinking about it as ways to gain ideas, getting their own ideas flowing. They have used it to dumb down complex topics. You may notice that ChatGPT is pretty good about taking like a complex reading and changing the reading level on it. I use it to make my writing better and more concise, since I often use speak type to write papers and I ramble. This is a student who's already using some other assistive technology to write and then is using ChatGPT as another kind of element here. I use it to generate ideas about the format of things. So what format does IEEE use? ChatGPT and AI is like really good at formatting APA, MLA, IEEE, et cetera. So they figured that out. They're using it for proofreading, editing, seeing different edits of the same paragraph. So they're kind of putting something in and seeing a different array of different ways that they might be able to kind of have something, wording or ideas, right? If I have an idea of what I want to say but cannot figure out how to put that sentence into words, I will give a description of what I want to say, and ChatGPT will give me options of how I can word it. So they're still making, most of them are still making kind of judgmental, like I'm evaluating the output of the AI, but they're using it in a wide variety of ways. And I found it interesting, actually, why the students say that they're not using AI text generators. So they're not using them, for the students who aren't using them, they're not using them because they don't want to get into trouble for plagiarism. They understand that a lot of the uses of it might be a violation of academic integrity. It's sometimes unclear to them when it's a violation and when it's not, so some of them are playing it safe. They know, some of them at least, that they are unreliable and can be abused. They think it's unethical. And so their pride is wrapped up into their writing. They never seemed useful to me, because I prefer writing myself because I like the process. Now, for me as a writing teacher, this is like, yay. And then, they're understanding, like, they're in college for a particular reason, right? I know I won't be growing in my own skill if I just let the technology do it for me. This is also, like, something really I'm glad to see this, right? Students aren't just, like, always uncritical users of these technologies. And then finally, here's a pretty sophisticated take in these last two ones. I'm not a huge fan of AI as a concept because I don't want to contribute to its data by inputting my writing. And they're unreliable and inaccurate and write in this uncanny style that has the structure full of information, but it lacks the actual information. I would never trust a piece of writing produced by software like this. So the messages about the unreliability of AI, the way that it's collecting data, or at least getting through to some Pitt students. And so that's, I think, something for us to be aware of. They also, this breaks down in the 3 different times that I've given this survey, pretty steadily a third of students who are interested in learning more about AI writing. Yes, maybe, and then the third of them are not at all interested. But a lot of them are recognizing that it's going to have a large impact on how we write in the future, which I would agree with. I want to learn more about these generators from a more professional standpoint and how they could impact writing-based jobs. They're looking beyond graduation. How to use them for research, for a starting point. Some of them are already using them for that, and they would like a little more support for that in the classroom. I'm curious about how they work. I'm not interested in using them. That I thought was kind of an interesting response. And then some of them are interested in using it for fun because they've been playing around with it. They use it for, planning trips, recipes, agendas, things like that, generating scripts, this particular one. So, Brian was very helpful in sharing this data, and so this is thanks to the writing coordinator, Subguptu, in English and Communication Studies department. So this is data that was collected as part of a kind of wider assessment of composition students at FIT. And so I thought this breakdown was pretty interesting, that 46% were not using AI. Is that something you want? Is that not? Et cetera. But some of them are using it for, I thought the breakdown was actually pretty similar to Pitt students. Brainstorming and idea development, outlining, organizing ideas, research, gathering sources, early drafting, editing and proofreading. They're using a lot for that. So this is a kind of, I think, a pretty standard breakdown about from a lot of different students about how they're using AI. So if anybody has stories or things they want to share about how their students are using AI, this would be a good moment to share anything or questions about that part. Observations? Yeah. I don't know how.
Thank you. So I've been teaching a class on putting their resumes and portfolios together. And so after they've put their resumes together, I've told them to run it through, like, definitely Grammarly to make sure everything is correct. Or if they're having a problem because they're obviously in school, they don't have that much work experience. If they're working at a job and they don't really have the right responsibilities listed, I said, ask ChatGPT what the job responsibilities would be for someone who works here, and then take from that what would work. So I've just been asking them not to take what they're doing and let it help them enhance what it is that they're doing.
That's great. And how do they take that? Do they appreciate that?
Some are a little off-put by it, and some jump right in.
That
but-
checks out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just because there seems to be a little bit of they're afraid,
Mm-hmm.
and some are like, all right, let me give it a try. Especially, I think if English is a second language, I think they're more willing to give it a try to get optimum text in there.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, I gave my students an assignment to look also with resumes to look on ChatGPT for the keywords you in the AST system, the automatic tracking system, so they can come up and put those words on their resume so they can get called.
That's
So,
great.
yeah.
I love that too because one of the things that we know now is that resumes are often being processed on the other end, like first pass is through AI. So if they can match up keywords or things in job descriptions, then that's going to help them have kind of an edge in that. And when I think sometimes about teaching AI as an equity issue, right? So when you're describing some students are like ready to dive right in and some students are more tentative, that those students are potentially going to be disadvantaged in a space where somebody is, using AI to do first pass filter and finding, kind of resumes that are going to fit whatever job description that they're looking for. So I think those are excellent examples.
Hi. My students are actually very curious as to how to use AI responsibly. So oftentimes in class, I'll ask them, what are your other professors saying about the use of AI? And they say that their professors say no, not at all, 100% no. But I think that they're recognizing that they're going to have to learn how to use it responsibly. So I am really here to learn how to guide them a little bit better.
That's great. Thank you. I think I'm going to show some examples of policies, but I think what you point out there of students are navigating a world where like AI is so new, they don't necessarily know, right? And they're experiencing really different policies and attitudes across their professional experience, their, other teachers, their, all these other contexts, right? And so they're kind of trying to figure out how to navigate that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I teach languages, does Daisy, and I'm looking for a way to make it more than a game. I mean, right now I have them put in one singular female noun, 5 adjectives, 3 verbs, and see what they come up with. And we get great surreal poetry.
I love it.
And each group would do a different composition of that sort, but I would like it to be more instructive.
Yeah. But I love that as a kind of generative, it's like a fun thing, and you can
Yes.
kind of see, a little bit about how the system is working by prodding it in ways that it may
Yes.
not have been originally designed. So that's great. Anyone else?
So my experience has been that, as I've encouraged students to attempt to use different AI tools in my class, there's a lot of fear sometimes, apprehension, and hesitance because I tend to feel sometimes they think if they use AI, they might get marked down or, it might not really be their work, and they have some of these sort of integrity concerns. But I think tied to that, I mean, as a faculty, I'm also in a dilemma in terms of to what extent would using AI in the classroom be contributing to some of these unexplored areas, right, around, say, surveillance capitalism, data mining, and this whole broader privacy questions and academic integrity?
Those are really big questions. And I do think that, I mean, you saw like at least two of the students that I excerpted here, and I have, those are kind of representative comments from the survey. They're thinking about these things too, right? Not all of them, but I think that our kind of responsibility, as you said, to teach them to think about this ethically, responsibly. Like, I think for the most part, students want to orient themselves ethically and responsibly to these new technologies. So I do think that there's a kind of responsibility that we have to kind of have them think about these things and understand, to what degree can they push against this? Are they part of this? All those kinds of questions. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I have a few more resources that speak to that later too. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay.
Directing traffic.
Okay.
Hi.
Oh,
Hi. This semester I'm teaching African American art history online, and I have been throughout the AI evolution. And I instituted a no AI policy, and they have to sign an honor code pledge. And then I've had some really interesting back and forth with a small minority of students, maybe 10, 15%, who their writing just sounds weird and sounds very bot-ish. And I've chosen to just engage with them. One of them was really interesting, was a student from Korea who said he wasn't using AI, he was uploading my assignments into a translation program, reading the assignment in Korean, writing his answer in Korean, and then using the translation program to put it back into English again, and he didn't feel that that was AI. Then I had another student who I literally wrote in my comments, Brian knows this, I would bet $500 this was generated by a bot. I can't prove it. And I ended up having a really good email exchange with this kid. And he said he was using Grammarly. And he also did not consider that to be AI. And I just pointed out the way everything, all of your descriptions of the assignments sound like the blurb on the back of a book. This book covers this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, tell me something from the book. Like, where's an idea? Where's a fact? So one of the interesting things to me is the way AI has, I think maybe without even telling students, who used to just think Grammarly was for punctuation or grammar, spelling or whatever, or like what is a translation program, they are all supercharged now on AI. And so the slippery slope, like we're just in slippery slope land at this point. And I do feel for them, and I was really grateful for these students who were willing to talk to me and engage about it. That's where I'm at right now, but it's very complicated and difficult.
Yeah, no, that's true. The way you say slippery slope land, I think, is crucial. And the fact that there's so you're encouraging them to use AI to run through, the resumes, and then you're saying no. And there's very good pedagogical reasons for that to happen in both of those classes, right? But students can't necessarily figure that out, or understand why those pedagogical reasons are driving the policies that you're implementing, right? And so I think, is translation, is it, are you looking for just ideas, or in which case then translating back and forth from Korean to English might be fine? Or are you interested in expression of ideas, in which case then it's not, right? There's contexts in which, your learning goals may or may not align to that kind of behavior in class. And so having those conversations, it's great that your students are willing to have those conversations. Does anyone else?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Carrie. I teach design, and I specifically teach Photoshop. So just in this past week, I have had the version of Photoshop that we have at FIT does not have certain AI features that are now available in beta.
Okay.
And they have a lot already. But I essentially had students ask to leave so they could go home and use their beta version of Photoshop to use AI generative fill, which is basically using word prompts to bring up a picture. We had a long discussion about, using AI if it supports your concept and your vision of the execution of it. But I just also wanted to say that luckily this Kate Middleton, Princess, whatever, Catherine thing came up. And the good
Photoshop conversation.
Amazing news out of this story is that there is an army of real live brains in the AP that have been quietly coming up with standards that they leapt on it and issued this, what is it called, a kill order or kill? So it was like a thrilling, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'm like, they've already been thinking about this, and there's these the ethical standards that emerge around the use of it. It's much more later in development than I thought. So it was a great class discussion around
Oh,
that.
that's wonderful. I love, too, that you're using contemporary things to talk. I mean, the students sometimes see this. This is my experience, and I'm teaching a course called Writing Machines right now, where we're working with large language models. And it turns, like, as the semester has developed, now I just, like, start out every class with, like, here's what's happened in AI. Like, here's an interesting controversy. Because I can do that reliably every single class. And then we have a really interesting conversation. And I feel like I learn a lot actually from the students too, because of their own orientation, because they have, even if they've not heard of the story, I give them a background and they have some sort of ethical feeling about what's going on. And it helps them kind of stay up to date too. So yeah, thank you. I love that. Yeah, the Kate Middleton Photoshop, like she's sitting there doing Photoshop apparently, which is like, you know, a little incredible, but maybe not. All right, maybe one more, and then we can move on to some of the other things.
Just
Yeah.
a couple things that
Yeah.
are kind of two sides of the same coin. One is I think something Amy was sort of getting at with, which is, you know, what is wrong with these essays that are being generated? I also teach online, and I've had quite a lot of problems. And, you know, one of my problems, again, is how to engage with the student about this. And now what I'm just doing is I'm not even talking about AI. I just try to talk to them about why it's a poor essay. I always start with, this is very well written, but it's so vague. It's so generic. It's you know, it's prone to, you know, these kinds of generalizations. And so that's one way I sort of deal with that. On the other side also is the opposite of vague, is sometimes they give me specific information that is just so incorrect. And one of the problems with that is, I mean, is that if they had just Googled my question, they would instantly have had numerous examples that they could just plug in, and those would be correct answers. And so I'm worried that they're using it as kind of a one-stop shopping for research. Mm-hmm. And as we know, it has it has access to so much information that it isn't an accurate research tool.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important point, and I do think that puts the onus on us to help them think through that too, right? Like this is not a, you know, one-stop shop tool that will do all of your things for you. Like it's just not going to work. But how they navigate across those tools, and then you know the point that you make too about what are the things you're valuing in writing, right? That what the AI often comes up with is not the kind of thing that we're looking for in the first place, right? But so many students have been told, too, that their writing isn't good because it's not polished, because it's, not, and they don't necessarily see, like, here's a superficially clean-looking essay, right, which may not be the kind of writing that they've been used to produce, and they may have been critiqued for not producing that kind of clean-looking writing, right? And so they may see that as like, well, this is obviously a better, thing than the writing that I'm doing, right? And that's, I think, an important conversation to have with students for sure. Okay, thank you so much for sharing all those things. AI policies. So this is actually I think if you get nothing else from the survey that I gave to Pitt students, the idea that over 95% of them request clear policies about how they're allowed to use computer programs in their class. And it is because they're navigating a really inconsistent landscape of what they can use where and when. And there's good reasons for that inconsistency. There's pedagogical reasons for them to use it in certain contexts. I mean, I teach 2 courses right now. I teach a graduate course and an undergrad course, and I have different policies for them because my learning objectives are different for them. And so this is, I think, really crucial for us to think through what kinds of policies we want in the class and to be able to talk to students about the reasons behind those policies as well, that they're not arbitrary, they're connected to our learning goals, even if they may not match the policy for the class that they go to right after ours. So when this hit, I started, because I direct the composition program, I thought, oh, we need policies right away. So I started writing some policies for our faculty to implement. And so I wrote 2 of them. One of them prohibiting AI altogether, and then the next one I'll show you, which is allowing limited use and disclosure about the use of AI. So the prohibiting one, I will say, this is going to get, I think, more and more challenging to completely prohibit AI moving forward, because if you're working in Google Docs, if you're working in Microsoft Word, like Copilot is coming in, Gemini is coming in, it's being integrated by default for students. Even in our emails, if we tab over and we accept suggestions, some of those are using Markov chain statistical stuff and some of them are using AI, but there's some sort of writing help that's happening in a lot of our software composition right now. And so it's hard even to know, like, sometimes students are using AI and they don't realize they're using AI. And that, I think, is an important conversation. The politics of tech industry integrating, help me write cues into, writing software is like, we could spend all day talking about that too, because I have some issues with that as a writing teacher. But we don't have control over those kinds of things. And even, you're saying the beta version of Photoshop, like, you may not wanting them to use that. They may want to, but like, here you go. Adobe's done that. Now you have to respond. So that's kind of the position we're in, but students are also navigating that. So this is the prohibition one. And the thing that, and I kind of tried to build in here a justification for why a class might be prohibiting AI so that students can kind of see this. And I go through this with students. We read through it. We don't read through all of my syllabus policies, but this one we do. And the thing that I want to note here, so I have this clause, and this is both in the prohibiting and the limited use of AI, which is that you are the author of your work for the course. I'm reading right here. And authorship means you take responsibility for your words and claims. Any use of AI technologies in your work will be considered an academic integrity violation and addressed accordingly. And that point about responsibility is, I think, really key. And where I'm getting that from is in January of 2023, so just a couple months after ChatGPT came out, Nature and a number of other scientific journals came out with a policy about emphasizing the responsibility of authorship, which I thought was fascinating that science journals came out with, like, they have this, like, amazing theory of authorship embedded in their policy now, which is they say, first, no LLM, that's large language model, tool will be accepted as accredited author on a research paper, so you can't use ChatGPT as a co-author. That is because any attribution of authorship carries with it accountability for the work, and AI tools cannot take such responsibility. And I think regardless of what tools our students are using, they still need to take responsibility for the work that they're doing in our class. And that message, I think, hits home with them. And I'm doing right now a research study where we're talking to researchers in the workplace, or writers in the workplace, and a lot of them are using AI to generate, templated things, genre-based things, rec letter, whatever kinds of things, right? But they all are emphasizing the fact that they still sign it. They still review it, they're still looking at it, right? And we know, like, examples of, say, the ChatGPT lawyer, maybe, where, somebody is using some sort of AI to produce, this particular lawyer had produced arguments in court, and it kind of made up, like, fake cases for him to cite, and then he, like, went through and then made up those cases to, like, kind of double down. And, like, that's a responsibility issue, right? So, like, it's not so much that you're using, already lawyers use LexisNexis. There's a lot of tools that support law, right? But it's the signing off of it, and that responsibility, I think, is a crucial professionalism point that we can embed in our policies. So I also have the policy for limited AI, and I won't go through this, but it includes that same responsibility clause. And I'm asking students to disclose the kinds of AI that they're using in order to produce their work. And that's partly too, I'm asking for, like, what model and what date, because these things change all the time. And a lot of times I think they just think it's like ChatGPT, right? But they may be using a different one, or they, and so, and depending on the date, depending on whether they use ChatGPT 3.5 or 4, whether they use Claude 3, these models are different. And I think that's a kind of AI literacy point to help students understand that it's not just a monolith of AI, that they're all designed in different ways. And this is just some policies that are from Pitt's Center for Teaching and Learning, which are much more abbreviated, but they're like good kind of standard policies. They don't include the responsibility clause, so I still advocate for our composition students or our composition faculty to do that. Can I just have a show of hands? How many of you have AI policies in your courses already? Most of you, okay, that's great. And if you don't, I have also at the end, I'm gonna share a kind of a whole resource list of helpful links, and on that I have links to the policies, but also links to Lance Eaton has collected like all of these policies. There's like, I mean, it's like drinking from a fire hose. There's like 100 policies of AI, which you are welcome to really dive into and adapt in ways that you want, but those are just a couple samples of it. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is learning to recognize AI writing and respond to it. So like the thing that you're talking about like, I recognize this like seems kind of bot-ish, right? And I'm responding to it, not necessarily talking about it being for sure AI, but like, here's a way that your writing isn't working for the completion of the assignment as I've asked for it. So there's a lot of different ways to think through that. The first thing I want to note, though, is that AI detectors are unreliable. So I don't advocate people using AI detectors, and that is like GPT-0, Turnitin has its own one too. There's a few of them out there, but at best they give only a percentage confidence of whether a piece is written by AI. So you may get like, this is 65% confidence that it's written by AI. And then what do you do with that? It may have been, it may not have been. So it's a hard kind of, it's not really actionable information. And at worst, they encourage an antagonistic relationship with students. And your point about student privacy and data and surveillance, like you're giving student work to one of these companies in order to detect the AI. So like there's some data issues there. I think I don't ever advocate putting student work into any sort of AI system. They can give both false positives and false negatives. So again, like the information isn't necessarily sure, like you can't really act on it. And then they discriminate against non-native English speakers. So there's been some research about basically that non-native speakers are more likely to be flagged by these systems for various locutions, maybe because of the prompting. There's like some different theories of why. But I think for equity reasons, it's important to note that, there's problems with these detectors. But instead of that, we can kind of rely on our like spidey sense of what students are doing, right? And that is, issues of inconsistency. That means a student submits assignments that don't match previous ones, especially if you have them do any in-class work, right? And I wouldn't advocate for doing all in-class work, but if you have some samples of in-class work, then you can kind of compare across those. I know in our composition classes, we always do like an initial kind of diagnostic essay that's usually theme related to the class, and we collect that and we can kind of, think about that across the term. Perfect spelling, grammar, and formal structure. It may be empty on the inside, but the surface level is usually pretty good. That disembodied or overly formal tone, stuff like no undergrad writes like that. You can kind of get a sense of that if you've taught a lot of writing. Inaccurate quotes and information from the text. A lot of times if it's like not matching up, it's like, inaccurate stuff, as you said, like that, they're not even Google checking stuff. We actually did have, in the very beginning at least, students would turn in things with like regenerate response or as a language model. Like you see this sometimes even published in like professional things, like those are pretty obvious tells and those are easy conversation. I mean, it's still not an easy conversation with a student, but it's like a pretty, pretty obvious use of it, right? Uses stock sentences and transitions overall, however, uses words like tapestry, myriad, unleash, elevate, delve. These are words you may have seen, right? Like they're so funny. No undergraduate ever has used the word a tapestry of emotions, to describe whatever. It's just like so clearly BS. And then you can talk about like what a weird response this is to like, to the assignment that I've given you. This is probably not your ideas, right? But the main thing is that students often can't respond with ideas beyond what's on the paper when you talk to them. So, and that I think is where it's good to have a policy where you're talking about responsibility. So like if you turn in a paper that's making certain arguments or that's saying certain things, then you are then responsible for the things you said there. You should be able to answer to that paper. You should be able to talk about the work that you've apparently done in the class, right? And if they can't talk about the work, if they can't present based on their paper, if they can't talk with their peer based on that paper, then there's other problems going on, right? And that actually, from the beginning of time, of course, students have been using their boyfriends or their moms or, whatever to get help, right? That might be a little bit unauthorized. And that's, oftentimes kind of flown under the radar. AI detectors wouldn't take that, turn it in, can't check that. But students still can't necessarily answer to the work if they've used too much external help for that kind of stuff. And if you think a student has improperly used AI, then I think it's very similar to the way that you might respond to it is very similar to ways that you might have responded to academic integrity concerns with plagiarism or contract cheating. And that is asking the students to expand on the ideas they wrote about. So I like to have students come in and then, we kind of tell me more about what you were thinking when you wrote this. And they may or may not be able to respond to that, right? You can ask them directly, what technologies did you use in composing this? And especially if you have a policy which says that they should be disclosing the kind of technology that they use, you can kind of sync up that conversation with that, right? You can ask them directly, did you use AI at any stage of their writing? And they may be thinking about Grammarly as not AI or whatever, in which case, that's a great conversation. Restate your policies and those of the university. Make sure that they understand what's allowed in your course. And that is, I think, why it's important to kind of bookend these conversations. So you start out with the policy, and here are the expectations, and then you can kind of follow up and say, remember, we talked about these expectations, and they're already listed in the syllabus. And I have a little more detailed description of those kinds of processes in that link at the bottom there with the Writing Institute at Pitt. Are there other examples of student work that you want to discuss or conversations that you've had with students?
Hi, I'm Lauren Lev with Marketing Communications Department. And two things I've discovered based on what you've been describing. One of them was student assignment submissions, and I'm working online, in which the jargon, the marketing jargon, is language that I may have been exposed to briefly or have never even seen before. That kind of is a sense for me of a tip-off that it's been generated somewhere else because it's not reflective of the text we're working in, and it's higher level that in some respects may have been just because it was either created or it's truly out there in terms of being relevant. Mm-hmm. My reaction to that when I respond back to that student is a combination of I'd like you to do this more in simpler. I kind of bring it back. I go, I'd like you to write this more simply, more specific and to the point, without a lot of jargon is what I literally write, without all of the marketing jargon in there. Mm-hmm. The other experience I had, which is within the last 2 days, was another university, another student, but marketing communications, where he responded to every one of my comments and feedback from all of the discussion boards we had been done up to this point, pulling out what I asked and saying, because I would write things like, you said this, did you mean? Or why is that? And that wasn't a function of really this experience. It was really the language and what he wanted to express. And he took the time, point by point, to restate it and to get deeper into what he had meant. Mm-hmm. That wasn't so much of an AI example, but it sort of was it was the other side of this world, to be able to hear the voice, hear the tone and the point of view.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems too that it would be wonderful to send that back to students and say, look, when I ask you a question, like I genuinely want to know your response to it, what you're actually thinking, you know, what your response to this is. And then, you know, students can kind of pick up on that too, right? Like, here's a positive example of what you're looking for in
And
the
like
class.
another hour
Yeah.
of last night, me responding back into that and saying, well, oh, here, I agree with that, but did you think of this? Or here's the other link for the other commercial. Did you know that that was referenced to that? That kind of stuff.
That's great. I love that too, because that's an example of an engagement with students potentially in online spaces too, which is, you know, as you mentioned, like one of the real challenges is like getting students engaged in online courses too. Yeah, thanks.
Is it on? Okay. One of the previous speakers explained that if you use ChatGPT to draft a professional email, it will almost always start with, "I hope this email finds you well," which is really something that you wouldn't. When you see that from an 18-year-old student, you're kind of like, but then the rest of the email doesn't seem as robotic. So I'm wondering how you address that with students, that if they're consistently seeing this verbiage from ChatGPT, that's not what's used in the real world. Like it's like she said, slippery slope land, right? So how would you suggest explaining that to students?
I think it's such an interesting conversation because it is like it's pointing to the kind of generic reproduction that ChatGPT does, right? And so, like, if you can kind of demonstrate for students, say, like, you know, make me, you know, several emails to your professor or whatever, and they all begin, "I hope this email finds you well. I hope," you know, and I know, like, I have stuck, like, I'll end an email best, you know, like, we all have, you know, whatever our signatures or the things, you know, but if they could see that, you know, and then like, okay, now what does that look like from a professor's point of view, right? If I receive 5 emails from students and they all begin, "I hope this finds you well," do you think that I will interpret that as a genuine wish for my good health? Like, no, it sounds like BS, right? Because it is BS. But, you know, a lot of the things that we do in writing, and, you know, it does have, like, that kind of little BS. Do I really best, sincerely, you know, what, I don't know. Like, these are kind of performative things, right? But that's an interesting conversation about genre, right? And thinking about, you know, how it's producing kind of surface level stock phrases, but what's the objective you want from this email? Do you want the professor to pay attention to you? Do you want the, you know, prospective employer to listen to you, right? In which case, using these like very generic kinds of things that take up space in an email that is to a very busy person is probably not going to be the best rhetorical choice, right? Yeah.
To go along with that, I do start emails that way, so now I feel very self-conscious. But I just wanted to, you know, as an example, I've been thinking about in my topics courses, really playing around with the grade distribution, especially for exams and things like that. Of course, for a midterm or a final, there are certain things that I want my students to take away from the class. Like there are certain concepts they want to see, that they demonstrate that they know them, they understand them. But I've been really thinking about dropping how much value those have on an exam, and then making other questions that are more open-ended more valuable. Like something like select 2 works that we've studied this semester and identify themes that they both share. Or another one that I think the students have a difficult time not answering honestly is what work has been the most impactful, or which work did you find the least relevant. So I've been kind of thinking about playing around with the values in that sense.
I love those examples, yeah. And you know what you're noticing about the marketing too, like if it's referring to things that aren't part of the class, like there's a very small percentage of undergraduates who are doing extra research beyond the class and bringing in other texts. Like, most of them, if they're like bringing in things out beyond the class, like they're using some other system in order to do that. So yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So while most of so I'm talking about prospective students, we just have to change our essay question and add a disclaimer to the e-portfolios to submit. The essay is only a small part. They have to submit a portfolio, but we notice we get these essays that are perfectly polished, absolutely contentless response to our essay question. And add a piece, change our question, and then add a piece about that AI can be useful for writing something like this, but it can't fully express who you are, and that's what we want to know. And I hope that will make it better, because I'm now at a point where, oh, it's a kind of poorly written essay, but I kind of get who you are. It makes me very happy.
I love that. And, you know, I mean, that's expressing your interest in students' own personal take on things, right, and their work, right? And, again, you know, again, about the example about the email, like, if your professor is getting 5 papers that look all very similar, like, is this useful? Is this good for you? Is this, you know, do you think this is going to get you a better grade? Is this going to, like, really help you stand out from, you know, other kinds of, you know, applicants in a job or, you know, whatever, right? Like, students can kind of, they can understand that. Maybe one more. Okay, yeah.
Hi. I just have a question that usually in my classes we set discussions in my cinema class, for instance, and I'm asking is because I always, when the students have an impeccable discussion, you know, entry, I usually put them on the screen and ask, and that's a question, not so much the student, but everybody to have an opinion or contribute to what the student just said, because I don't want it to expose when the student. And I'm surprised that the students, some of them are very eloquent about what they have written before. So I'm emphasizing more the oral component of the assignments now. That I value, let's say, if they do a discussion is 5 points, at least 1 point is when you participate actively in the discussion. So that would make them more responsible without. But my question is that could also be challenging to the student in a sense that they feel confronted by me. Let's say trying to put out what you wrote is what, you know, really your own ideas. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question about whether, you know, I do think that having students orally respond to a kind of question is one way of having them, you know, be, again, responsible for the work that they're doing, right, be able to articulate the kinds of arguments that they're making. It's working on speaking skills, et cetera. Some students do feel put on the spot. There may be, you know, other issues if they're not comfortable in English, if they're shy, if they're, you know, there's other concerns or whatever. But you know, sometimes I know faculty at Pitt have used the chat function in Canvas. I don't know if you have Canvas, but there's a chat function in there. A lot of course management systems will have that. So there's other ways for them to textually kind of participate. You can also, I've had students take collective notes in class. And they can get participation for taking notes. And then those notes are helpful for students who've missed class or students who may not have fully followed things. And, you know, they can talk about the notes that they participated in. So if you're not looking specifically for them to develop oral skills, there's other ways for them to participate in real time where they might be able to, you know, not have the kind of, you know, the pressure of that kind of oral performance. So thanks. Okay. I want to move on to a few other things here. And this actually, I mean, I feel like a lot of the conversation we've had here is really working on this, which is emphasizing process over product. So designing assignments focusing on inquiry over answers. ChatGPT is really good at coming up with answers. AI comes up with answers. Even if those answers are BS, it will come up with some answer. But what are the questions that students can ask in the course of their assignment? What elements of the assignment can the student determine based on their own interests? So when you're saying, like, what's the, you know, text that's most impactful, you know, like that kind of getting them to respond personally. There is a small percentage of students who will, like, still put that through ChatGPT, but for the most part, you know, that you're asking for their opinion. You can support that through your actions in the class too, and like, wow, I thought that was really interesting that you know, found that to be the most impactful, you know, thing, or why didn't you like that, or whatever, right? And then I think it's good to talk to students about what learning goals they have. So we have learning goals in a class, but students are very used to being in a kind of passive, responsive space in classes where they are just responding to the learning goals that we have. But if they stop and think about it, they have their own learning goals too, right? They have goals for it. And in fact, I had a conversation with a student this term where I really thought that he had written using AI, and I think maybe he'd put something through Grammarly, or maybe he just, like, was really trying to write it, like, very formally, I think might have been the case. And I was like, you know, I had that conversation, tell me a little bit about what you were thinking. He could totally answer all the questions, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I understood that that was his thinking. And I was like, well, what was your attempt? Like, this reads really formal to me here. Like, what's your, and he's like, I'm trying to work on my writing. I'm trying to become a more formal writer because I've been told I write too casually. I'm like, oh, actually, that's great. I'm a writing teacher, it turns out. Come to my office hours. Like, let's have a conversation about meeting your goals for writing in this class, which might be, you know, kind of side goals to the other work that we're doing in the class. And then we had great conversations. But I think a lot of times students won't share their own learning goals unless you ask them what their interests are. And maybe their learning goals are, you know, means to an end, right? They want a job in X and, you know, et cetera. But you can help them match up the things that you're doing in your class to the kinds of things that they may want to do afterwards, right? The kind of outcomes that they're looking for. What about online teaching? You have this beautiful guide for AI and teaching, and this is a really great quote from it, which is, to best support online learners' success, assignments should be designed to make critical thinking and the process of learning visible to the online course instructor and online classmates. Scaffolded assignments with feedback are more effective than just asking for a paper or essay as a completed final product in one step. And so that is, and you know, if you have things that are kind of being done in staged ways or scaffolded ways, you don't necessarily have to be giving all of the feedback. That's a lot of work. Sometimes I think it is important to give that kind of feedback. But you know, you can check things, just, you know, complete, not complete. You can have students respond to each other. You can have students present in, you know, real-time space, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can have students kind of show you parts of big projects in the process of them that isn't necessarily you like reading multiple drafts and, you know, staying up until midnight every night trying to get all your work done. So scaffolding assignments, you can break up big assignments into smaller pieces, have students share their work with each other, et cetera, and emphasize learning goals at each stage of the assignment. So I think, again, you know, it's to continue to keep students focused on what are we doing here? Why are we here? I think that kind of helps them make good choices then that are appropriate to what you're hoping for them to get out of the class. So recommendations for effective teaching practices. This is again from the guide that you have access to that Jeffrey shared with me. And this is, I won't go through all of these, but these are echoing a lot of the things that you've already shared here. That, you know, scaffolding assignments prompt learners to incorporate their own personal views, experiences, examples, and ways for them to make their learning and thinking visible to you. So that is like seeing things like scaffolded, you know, like little parts of it. You know, what's your research question? What's your response to your peer's research question? Those kinds of things. And you can have learners create a multimedia response to an assignment, which for the moment is still harder for AI to do. But eventually, you know, with Sora and other technologies, right, it's gonna be increasingly easy for AI to do that as well. So I want to show you actually just a couple tools that I find. So these are very similar. Tools called draft back and revision history. So again, I don't advocate running things through online AI detectors, but these particular tools I like to share because they can help students watch the writing process in action. So basically, if a student writes something in Google Docs, and with the caveat that they would be writing something in Google Docs, you may or may not want that, data issues, et cetera, and give you editing access, if you have this plugin, either Revision History or DraftBack installed, you can play back the composition of that piece, which is super interesting, actually, because what it does, and it gives you, at the top, it'll give you like the stats from the writing statistics of how long it's been going. So this is my document, Dear Students, Should You Use AI for Writing? And these are all my different writing sessions. And you can see, I'm not going to play it now, but basically, there's at the bottom, I mean, it really is like watching a movie, and you can play it up to 8 times as fast as it was written. And what's interesting, I'm a fairly expert writer, is that I don't write from top to bottom, right? So like I write, I take notes, I go back, I expand that, I do that. You know, I think most of us do that, right? Students don't necessarily know that, right? They think you write and, you know, from top to bottom. Maybe you come back and fix the grammar or whatever, but showing them the actual writing, composing process of an expert writer can then introduce a really great conversation about processes of writing, right? And that they are nonlinear processes. When you're asking for revision, you're asking for something much more substantive than, checking all the grammar, right? You're looking for them to rethink paragraphs, expand here, change the sentence, work on the transitions, all those kinds of things. And they can actually see that happen. So I can show my own writing then as a kind of example for that. And incidentally, as long as they've composed it in Google Docs, it also gives you a history of how they've composed it, right? So like if they're copy pasting into something, that gives you some information. But I do like that it's like emphasizing the pedagogical aspect of it with the process. Okay. There's like a whole section in here about how teaching students how AI writing works. So you can kind of look through this given the slides that, because I do think it's important for students to understand how it works and how it's working well, how it's not working well, or that it is very good on some surface level things, it hallucinates, et cetera. There's some bias issues, stuff like that. Thinking about what you want students to get out of the course, students, again, are likely to use AI in their work after graduation. Here's, again, another quote from the report that you have here. AI will not replace designers, but will change the role of designers in the future. Designers will need to bring creativity, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills to the creative process, but they will also need to be proficient with AI tools and technologies. So this is, again, a kind of impetus for us to be thinking about how we might be integrating AI in ethical, responsible, generative ways in our classes. And keep in mind, as you were noting, some of the students like dive in right away, and some of the students are really apprehensive about it. Students have very different orientations to it. Not all of them are going to be like, rah, rah, we're working with AI now, right? They're going to be really nervous about it. So it's important to kind of help them through that process. Okay, so now I want to share with you some ways that you can use AI, you can embed AI into assignments. And I'm using examples from a few different online educational resources that have come out. There's been a lot of open educational resources. There's also, tons of blogs. I have some of them in the helpful links document that I'll share with you. But here's 3 of them. So TextGen Ed, which happens to be the one I'm most familiar with because I helped co-edit it. And that came out in August of 2023. There's also the AI Pedagogy Project out of Harvard, and then the Exploring AI Pedagogy, which is a kind of cooperation between NCTE and MLA, which are English professional organizations. And then also your own local guide here for the Fact 2 Guide for Optimizing AI in Higher Education. Did you want to say anything about it, or you just? Oh, it's great. It's awesome. There's like really good, what I love about it is that there's like, first of all, it's like good advice. I'm like, oh yeah, I say the same thing. Like, great, great, great. So it's like fabulous advice, but also there's really good examples of SUNY faculty integrating AI into their courses in there. And it sounds like there's going to be another edition coming out too soon. So I highly recommend that, and there's the link there. So here, my first example of how you might be able to, and I'm just going to give you a bunch of examples, and you may, all of these are free to, like teaching, right? Like all of our teaching is some refraction of other teaching that we've seen and our own ideas, and so these may be kind of ideas for you to adapt then and into your own context and into your own learning goals to align with what you want students to get out of your class. So here, this example is about having students use AI to learn genre and structure. So in fact, like the email, for instance, like regardless of whether they use I hope this email finds you well, you should probably have some greeting rather than I missed class or, whatever, right? Like what's a kind of greeting? And so you can have them kind of break down that genre, right? So Trevor Johnson-Stiegelman has students feed the body of their lab report into an AI to write the abstract and the conclusion. And then they compare what they've written. What did they miss? What did the AI miss? And what structure does the AI give to the student writing? So they can kind of analyze the differences between those two things and think a little bit about a very structured genre, right, which is the lab report. And especially the abstract and the conclusion are very structured parts of it. And that's kind of part of a larger genre, which is the human versus machine contest, which is having students analyze different affordances of how humans can write and how machines or AI can write. So this particular example is from Text Gen Ed, from Tim LaQuintano. He asks his students to change the reading level on a document manually and then use an LLM like ChatGPT to compare the results. So one of the things, if you remember from the very beginning, one of the Pitt students talks about dumbing down complex topics. AI is pretty good at changing reading levels. So if you have it, and this is a very common technical writing kind of activity, right, is like have a very complex thing, you write an executive summary, you write it at a 5th grade level, you can put it into online things that level the Flesch-Kincaid level, things like that, and you can have students talk about those things. And all of these assignments in Text Gen Ed have very detailed implementations, reflections from the teachers, how long it takes to go through them, et cetera, and you can adapt them for your own classes. Here's one from the AI Pedagogy Project, which is helping students develop good questions with AI. So a lot of, at least in composition courses or professional courses, you may have students go out to interview a professional in whatever area they may be interested in, right? One of the challenges of that is always you need to make sure the student is well prepared so that they're not wasting the time of the professional that they're talking to, right? That can sometimes not work out, right? And so Catherine Welsh has students practice interviewing a chatbot before they interview a human expert. So not only, and the chatbot could, develop good interviewing questions too, but if they have their interview questions developed and they can prompt it and say act like you are a designer with 20 years of experience doing product marketing, blah, 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 whatever, some sort of thing, right? And please answer these questions. It will actually do a pretty good first pass. And if they're asking bad questions, it will come up with bad answers. And that's a really good space to have a conversation about how do they then write better questions so that when they actually talk to the product designer, then they are not wasting that person's time, right? And they're going to get more out of that interview. Students can use AI as a peer reviewer. So if they want feedback on their writing, now again, this is a caveat. Sometimes it gives good feedback. Oftentimes, AI will give better feedback than their peers, unfortunately. But it's another way that you can have them kind of articulate their own, what are their goals in writing, right? Is my thesis statement strong enough? Am I making an argument about this? Is this, doing a logical flow, whatever? You can have them articulate their own values that are reflected in your kind of learning goals, right? And then prompt the AI to give them feedback according to those questions, right? So it gives them, all of these kinds of assignments are giving them a little bit more ownership over their interactions with the AI versus just putting something in and getting something out, right, uncritically. Students can use AI as an adversary to strengthen arguments. So if they have an argument, then they can put it into the AI and see, prompt it to point out what are some things I missed, what are some common arguments against this, et cetera. And that will help them kind of get a more diverse point of view of whatever thing they're arguing. I will say too, there's a little caveat here that I don't advocate you putting student work into these things. If you have qualms about students putting their own work or requiring it, it's important to have a kind of conversation about that. Are there other options for them? Is this something you're okay with? Is this something they're okay with? AI for creative play in both text and image. So Brandy Easter has this great assignment where she has them co-authoring a children's book with text and image generation. And there was Brandy talks about this in the assignment, but there was a big controversy about a children's book author who had used AI in order to, compose this book. But so she starts out this conversation with ethical questions about authorship and what does that mean and what are the tools that we should be using and not. And so there's a kind of both a using these tools in kind of helping students understand the technical aspects of using these tools and the compositional affordances of them, at the same time that they can kind of still question, like, what is the role of this tool in my own composition? How is this circulating? What does this mean for even questions of copyright or those kinds of things, right? You can have them do both and, I think. And Brandy Easter's example is a really good way of doing that. So AI can also be an impetus for evaluating sources. So you may know that AI makes up a lot of things. So this is in a science course where Jessica Kale had students generate a lit review with AI. According to whatever lit review, they prompt it with that. And then students evaluate the accuracy of the review. So they take that, and then they have to do the actual real research of tracking down the sources and finding where all these claims are, right? In order to then highlight green, the information is accurate, the source exists, etc. Yellow, the information is accurate, but it's not relevant. Or red, the information is inaccurate, or this source doesn't exist. And so students then have to do research and have to evaluate sources incidentally, right? And checking on the AI. And what she found is that students kind of discovered, oh, wait, I can't rely on this for my sources, which is a wonderful lesson for them to learn, right? That there's a caveat there. It also generates like kind of a beautiful infographic here about how inaccurate AI sources can be. So AI can also be an example text to critique. So you can use AI to generate an example paragraph or series of sentences that show patterns of errors to teach students how not to write. One of the things as a writing teacher, I often like to show positive examples. I feel very uncomfortable showing student examples of like bad writing, even if I've taken off the name from the student, because they know it, they recognize it, it makes them feel terrible, right? But ChatGPT can, these AIs can produce bad writing. So one of the things that I have had it do, I like to kind of talk to students about misplaced modifiers. It's a very common mistake that is easily remediable if they have conversations about it. So look at this. It took me 30 seconds to prompt ChatGPT to write a bunch of misplaced modifiers. I could do it relevant to whatever theme in my class, things like that. I used to write these sentences myself. I found it quite challenging, actually, to write bad sentences and show them examples. But, if you wanted students to think about, like, why is this paragraph, like, overly broad? Like, why is this vague? This kind of thing. Like, this is bad writing. Let's talk about why this is bad writing. And they can enjoy just ripping it apart. They can actually kind of, like, be interested in that, right? Because they're usually on the other side of that kind of critique. So it's kind of fun for them to recognize that themselves. Okay, and then AI for class activities. Here's just two examples of this, which is AI to digest polls. So especially if you're teaching a big class, you can enhance engagement by like getting open-ended answers to say, Google form or Poll Everywhere or something like that, and have them. You can put those answers then, as long as the students know that, Google Forms and Poll Everywhere will give you like a CSV file, Excel type file you can put in there, and then it can generate themes. Okay, so here are the things we're interested in here. Here are the concerns we have about this conversation in class, and then you can talk about according to the themes, right? And so students, even in a large lecture class, to kind of get them to participate in open-ended ways, not just like through the clicker kinds of things. This is one way of doing that, where you wouldn't have to like read through and respond to each individual student's thing, because it will do a pretty good job of pulling out themes. And then also, my students came up with this one, which is have students teach AI a concept from class. So my students were asking me, well, can ChatGPT write slang? And I know the answer to that question, but I was like, I don't know. Like, why don't you see if it can write slang? And so then my students then tried to teach ChatGPT how to write Gen Z slang, which was super hilarious because, of course, I'm like terrible. I'm not good at this, right? And so then they were like teaching it, and they were like giving it feedback about like nobody uses hashtags anymore. I'm like, really? Nobody? I don't know, And so anyway, but they, they're showing it like, okay, that's too long, that's inappropriate for this context, et cetera. And that was fun for them because they're doing this like rhetorical exercise based on their own expertise. In the meantime, they're understanding how you can prompt an AI to do very specific kinds of writing. Okay. And so that's basically the end of the kinds of resources that I have for you. But I have, okay, well, here's some things to think through. But mostly the helpful links document here, which has like a whole bunch more, like there's policies, there's some resources about teaching AI literacy kinds of questions, some other example, all the links to TextGenEd and AI Pedagogy Project and your SUNY report are all in there too. All right, and I'll leave that up for a while. So thank you. If we have questions then, or... We just have a few minutes for questions, but...
Hi, my name is Mitchell Kim, and I teach in the production management department at FIT. So what I wanted to just share with you is some observation rather than a direct question per se. What I'm seeing, I teach accounting, finance, Excel for business, information systems, and multimedia software for marketing communication students as well. So, but what until recently, I was a CFO of a biotech company as well. And so what we're seeing, what I'm seeing in the business world is that AI is everywhere. So
yes.
we could fight it, or we could embrace it. And I think it's really helpful session that we're having here. I know we're focusing our discussions on using that for text generation and whatnot, but I do think that it's important for us to understand how to harness it rather than just say, fight against it and say, is it for cheating or not, right? And so, and in fact, for Excel, for PowerPoint, AI is everywhere, right? Including those. So I'm actually trying to incorporate some of that AI. How do we use AI in Excel, for example, creating like customer service sheets and data sheets and whatnot. So I think we're going there, and in fact, if you look at like WebEx, creating web pages, that's all going to be done by AI. So I think it's as academics, we need to understand how do we stay ahead of the game. So that how do we keep ourselves updated, and then how do we translate that so that we could share with our students, incorporate that into our coursework, I think. So that's what I want to share.
Yeah.
Secondly, I also teach finance and accounting, so I don't see a lot of what AI does for that, but I think that's also coming as well because, in fact, AI could be used to create all these business and operating financial models too. So that's something that I'm always keeping a close tab on as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, it is, so the AIs are not particularly good at math right now, but they are really good at crunching data. So, working through Excel spreadsheets, stuff like that, that's like out of my area, but definitely like people are absolutely using it in professional applications. And when I've done interviews with people in the workplace, they're using it to write code, they're using it to crunch data, they're using it to align data sets, clean data sets, like all that kind of stuff. So absolutely, I think you're right that like this is another reason why we have to critically engage with AI. Yeah.
Before the next question, just Grace is going around and putting a QR code on your table with a brief exit poll. So if you could fill that out for us before you leave today, that would be great. It helps us in reporting for this grant. And our next question is over here.
Hi, my name is Teresa, and I teach in the English and Communications department. So it's really, and it's not even composition, it's a course that a number of freshmen, mostly freshmen, there are some sophomores too, come in, who have more than the usual mechanical issues, grammar issues, analytical issues. So it's almost like developmental writing. So it is really important, in my view, that I'm seeing their actual writing so I can help them be better writers. So I do have a no AI policy that was much like yours. And I, in one of your slides, you were saying that I am still working on how to approach a student about this. I absolutely don't want it to be confrontational. But I also want them to understand, hey, I see this. I see what's happening here.
Yeah.
Not just through my spidey sense. You know what I mean? Although that's always first, right? And I've got a pretty good one after 20 years. But you know, through other ways, I'm checking, some of which have been mentioned. I just wanted to say, I feel that this stuff is so different from a simple plagiarism. You know, one of the things you had up there is approach them as if they had plagiarized.
Mm-hmm.
Plagiarism to me is so black and white and so easy to bust them on, quite frankly. I just, you know, I read a chunk, it's obviously not written by them. I know how to recognize their writing. They have a tattoo after a while that you can see. So I just put that chunk into Google. I find the review from the Washington Post where they lifted it from. And I just put that in the feedback and I say, hey, I found this big chunk. You know, I know you plagiarized that. You want to do this over again? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's different with this stuff, particularly if you're saying that you're discouraging us from even putting it through the detectors, which I would never, then you're leaving it to our spidey senses alone, which, I mean, we tell them to come up with evidence for everything they're saying. So I'm trying to hold myself to the same standard. Anyway, I still feel a little bit between a rock and a hard place in terms of not confronting, but bringing this up in a way that's evidence-based.
Yeah.
Which is what we're asking them to do.
No, I think that's a really hard thing because you could, I mean, definitely. I've shown students the 2 sentences from Wikipedia or the paragraph before and like, yeah, I mean, like, how do you answer to that? Like, clearly you copied this from this other source, right? Whereas you cannot trace that necessarily from ChatGPT, although if you put in your own prompt, like, a lot of times it will come up with something similar, you know? Like, I've had students respond, like, 1 through 6, here are some ideas, and, like, their ideas were different, but, like, come on, like, you didn't know, like, right? So I think you can show that kind of thing, but I think, you know, the response that your colleague kind of said about, like, this is vague, this isn't interesting, this isn't the writing that I'm interested in, you know, right? Even if you're not, like, 100% sure on the AI thing and you don't want to, like, accuse them of it, a lot of times the writing it's already not fulfilling the thing that you're asking for, right? And so I think that the parallels are more like if students have previously gotten too much help from their roommate or whatever, right? Which is like, or their fraternity or whatever, you know, like this has been a problem for quite some time, right? And that is untraceable. Versus the kind of plagiarism where it's like literally copy and paste, right? But I do think the reason why I make that parallel is that I think our response pedagogically, a lot of that is the same. So like breaking down assignments, making sure that course goals are clear, making sure students are invested in as much as they can be with the course, like all those kinds of things are the same ways that we kind of have preemptively dealt with potential plagiarism or academic integrity violations in the first place. But yeah, I mean, and having those conversations, I think those are difficult conversations. And I think your impulse to err on the side of kind of generosity is where I think we should be. So this is where, having conversations about how did you compose this? What were you thinking? Like that's listening to the student, right? And like I had one of those conversations, as I just said, where I really thought it was the AI. And now I don't think it was because of the way that he responded. And, even if he'd put it through or whatever, like we ended up having a great conversation about writing. And his writing, became less weirdly formal and vague after that, So it was a good conversation. And I think, figuring out how we have those good conversations and how we, kind of continue to kind of refocus on our learning goals and on their learning goals is the way to move through this together. Because, we don't know, they don't know, it's all new stuff.
We have time for just 2 brief questions. Patrick, you can go next, and then you. And then after that, if you need to get going, it's okay, because we're past 2 o'clock. But go ahead, Patrick.
So for those of us who do have, more open AI policy in class, so I have one that asks students to disclose how they use it and why they use it. And so it creates, I guess, more work for them from one angle. But I'm wondering if you have any examples on how to normalize that type of disclosure. Because I know students they'll use it, but they won't. It's still somewhat, it's taboo. So I'm curious, like, what are some other steps to get them to the point where they do disclose and feel okay with saying, okay, I did use it, and this is how I did it.
I mean, I guess I would think, I'm thinking when I ask students to do this in my writing machines class, where I'm like literally asking them to work with different models, and sometimes they'll come and they won't tell me which model they use. I'm like, I can't evaluate this. You need to tell me like all the things, and what's the prompt you use. Sometimes they won't tell me the prompt. I'm like, but that actually is crucial to the output that you got out here. So, I mean, mostly I guess I go back to them and I say like, look, in order for me to evaluate this assignment, for this assignment to be lined up with your result of this assignment, to line up with the kind of goals that I have, the learning goals that are like literally in the assignment sheet, then we need to know, like, you're working with different models, you're critically engaging with different models, whatever are my learning goals in there. So again, I think, for the most part, students, like they're trying to do well, and if they know that you're going to be okay with it, but you can articulate that it's, maybe you're okay with it, but maybe their next teacher isn't, but in this context, here are your expectations, and this is why you need those things, is because different models matter, and because I want to know why you're prompting it, how you're prompting it, could you be doing it better, that kind of thing. I mean, I guess, I don't know, my answer is always like, have a conversation with students. So it's like my basic algorithm for almost everything for teaching. So there it is.
I had trouble hearing. I don't know if someone said this already, so forgive me, but what I had a situation. So what I started doing is I do my own assignment in ChatGPT now, and I see what I get.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really good. The student that the first time I did it was to one student, and I have an excellent rapport with him, but I had that suspicion. I have the paid version. I put it through both. He used the unpaid version, and it was really similar. I didn't show it to him, but so now I do it all the time, and you don't always get exactly the same, but that's what the minute I generate an assignment, I chat GPT it, and it gives me.
No, I think that's a really good example, because it is, if you put your own assignment through ChatGPT, it will often give you at least like a basic structure, and you could see that if a student turns in some variation on that theme, then it's not 100%. You're saying you're asking for evidence-based kind of ways to have these conversations, but that is like if a student doesn't admit to doing it, then that's a conversation.
I don't necessarily use it to marshal evidence. My husband's an attorney, right? I'm not deposing them, but if I suspect it, and it matches up, then I might have one of those conversations that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes me feel more comfortable even having the conversation.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I have a leg to stand on, even if I don't tip my hand.
Well, the other thing too is if you put your assignment through ChatGPT and it does a really good job of it, then like maybe think about the assignment, right? Like maybe because students are going to be entering a workplace where they are competing against AI writing and production, right? So what they need to be able to do is something different, better than, that quote that I gave for design. It's changing what designers are doing, right? So designers are going to be using AI tools, but what are they lending to the process? And so I think kind of auditing our own assignments against what AI can do is another crucial thing for us to respond to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vee, for this opportunity to reflect collectively on AI and our experiences in the classroom. We really appreciate you making the time to be with us today. And thank you to all of you for being here and for participating. I hope you have a great afternoon and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.